Om Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Vridavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandathami Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshini. Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Fullara Vindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Geetam Vridaduhe Namaha. Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyaha Mokshayishyami Ma Shuchaha. So welcome everyone to this next session of Bhagavad Gita. And like we've been doing recently, I just have 2 questions this time as part of our reflection time. This time, the format is a little different. So let us see. I made it a little easier by putting it as a multiple choice quiz. Essentially, the question here is pertaining to Shloka number 11, what is the quality of a wise man or Panditaha? So there are 4 options and you have the choice to choose any one of them, or if you think there is more. So the first one is, he is same in all circumstances. He does not grieve for the living or the dead. He's an advisor to all people, and he's sought after for his knowledge.
Number 2, he does not grieve for the living or the dead.
Fantastic. Very good. Very good. That's exactly what is said in Shloka number 11. I just put in the others because they all also might, sometimes pertain to that, right? To that particular word. Okay, the next one. What is the quality of Atma referred to in particularly Shloka number 12? As we are moving, there are a number of them, but I wanted to check on here what you see. Atma was there in the past, but not in the present. Atma is there in the present, but was not there in the past. Atma is there in the present, but will not be there in the future. But Atma was there in the past, is there in the present, and will continue to be there.
Continue to. Atma was there.
Atma never dies.
Yeah. Very good. Atma never dies. Excellent. Very good. Just simple, but something to make everyone think. So this is a true or false statement. I'm not the body. But this is pertaining to Shloka number 13 again. Okay. Dehinosmin yatha dehi, that Shlokam. I'm not the body. The body goes through changes of youth, old age, etc. I see the changes happening, so I'm different from the body. And a firm man, dhiraha, is one who has the discrimination. So each one of them, what do you think? I'm not the body. Is that true or false?
They all are true. Atma is true.
Yes, I am Nitya. From a Nitya standpoint, I'm the Atma. And I'm in reality, I'm not the body. Correct. Very good. So the body goes through changes of youth, old age, etc.
Yeah, body.
True. Yeah, it
It's
is
true.
That is true.
Correct. So the body goes through the changes, but the Atma remains the same,
Remains the same.
right? Okay. So the third one is, I see the changes happening, so I should be different from the body.
Yeah, true.
That is true. Exactly.
True.
And this is, we can see that happening, right? I mean, when I have a hurt in my hand or something, I can easily figure that out, right? I know that my hand is going through it. But sometimes though, I mean, this is, I'm using this as a way of giving some examples also. But then when somebody looks at me and says, and I'm just going to be a little funny here. Suppose somebody says, oh, from the last time I saw you, I think you've gained some weight. Immediately, don't we feel a little, I identify myself with my body at that point, and I feel, okay, maybe I did or something, So this is just something to keep in mind, that if Bhagavad Gita is trying to teach us how I can be detached from the body, but yet recognize my body is an instrument for which which needs to be maintained so that it can serve my purpose and take me towards my goal. But nevertheless, yes. And then the last one, a firm man, dhiraha, is one who has a discrimination. Correct?
No.
What is no?
No.
So it
is correct.
It is correct. It is also correct, because in this Shloka, Dehinosmin Yatha Dehi, it basically talks about, he knows, he's able to distinguish himself, so he does not grieve at all. And even in the 15th Shloka, like we said, so he's a Viveki. Okay. And the name for Lord Krishna that we were talking about last time was Achyutaha. Achyutaha was another name for Krishna in chapter 1, so I couldn't find that right away quickly, but I wanted to mention that was a name last week, an additional name. Very good. So that's all. I just had 2 questions this time, but wanted to make it a little different format. So what have we seen in the second chapter so far? So what we have seen is that the second chapter is almost like the book of contents, okay? Which is, in the second chapter, pretty much all the entire philosophy of Bhagavad Gita has been given. We see the highest philosophy of Vedanta being discussed here. We also see how Arjuna, who basically makes a wrong judgment of the situation, and when we say wrong judgment, it is from that highest level of Atma. So we see that he makes a wrong judgment, and therefore he goes through this mental grief, and then he collapses. So for such a person who's imagining and who's projecting in the future, Shri Krishna has no other choice but to give him that highest knowledge. And in this, we were looking very seriously last time on this very important shloka of looking at the real versus unreal. And we talked about how that the real is something which is always there and it cannot be destroyed, whereas the unreal is born and it dies continuously. So from the highest standpoint of visualizing the world of happenings all around us, so the pure consciousness of the self is the one which is the substratum, and it is all the happenings which is due to the fact that we are identified with this egocentric, from a selfish standpoint. So from that, this world we see as a projection, and Sri Krishna is coming up with one argument after the other in this chapter to address a number of questions of Arjuna and to show us from that highest level how the problem that Arjuna is trying to see is not even there. So the shloka that we saw was Nasito vidyate bhavaha, na bhavo vidyate sataha, ubhayorapi drishtontaha, dvanayos tattva darshibihi. And we analyzed this quite in detail, but I thought I should again review it a little bit, because as always, the second time when we review it, there are few more things that really clicks within us. So for that reason, I have a few examples today, which I will go through one by one. So tattva darshibihi, that is the knowers of the truth, which is again the dhiraha, and the firm person, the panditaha, those people. And here the word given is tattva darshibihi. They are the ones who are able to recognize, see basically that what the difference between asataha and the sataha. So asataha is the unreal, asataha bhavaha, which is unreal, does not exist, na vidyate, so it is not there. That is the statement number 1. And then sataha abhavaha na vidyate, we saw that too. That is, there is no, the sataha of the real, abhavaha, non-existence, is definitely not there, which means for the real, there is no non-existence. So for the unreal, there is no existence. And for the real, there is no non-existence. I know it sounds a little complicated the way it is put forth, but in a sense, the bottom line is what is actually always there is the real. And what is it that appears, or it has an apparent reality, is the unreal. And that is what is said in the shloka. So again, the real is the one that is always there, and the unreal is only apparently there. And the tattva darshibihi recognizes the difference between the real and the unreal. So they are able to distinguish this. So we can see this clearly in this example of the ocean and the waves. So we see that in this ocean and the waves, they rise from the ocean, and in and through this, the waves would be apparently real, because we say it is apparently real because for the moment right now, it seems to be there, but it really did not exist in the past, right? In the past, the ocean was very calm, and then you had this wave which came up, and then it just disappeared away. So in Vedanta, there is, we have a definition for what we call as satyam, or the real. And the definition is trikale abhadita vastu. Trikale abhadita vastu. That is 3 periods of time, trikale, abhadita vastu, which means that truth which existed in the past, which is existing now, and which will also exist in the future, is called as Sat. So here the example is the ocean is the one that existed before, it exists now, it will be in the future. So that is the real Vastu. And in comparison to that, the waves are just coming and going, right? And just an example from our own Michigan, if you want to think about it, we have the leaves which are not on the trees now. We have all our trees which is very dry, twigs, which is all waiting for the leaves to come. But very soon in spring, we're going to have that tree full of leaves. And again, back in the fall, those leaves are going to fall off. And then we're going to have the same trees back in December, January. So the trees, the way we see it now, is existing all the time. The leaves, they come and go. So the leaves have an apparent reality, whereas the trees are having the permanent is the real. So just to give you another example of a real versus unreal. So how do we understand this relation in terms of the world? So the world, which is made of beings and objects, we see are forever being born and they die just like the waves. We are the ones, we give reality to it and we get affected by it. And we hold on to whatever that vastu or that relationship which gave us a particular effect. We hold on to it, but whatever that object is or whatever the relationship was, they would have come and gone, but we hold on to it, we give reality to it, and our judgment gets impaired because of this. So to keep in mind that in and through everything in this world, if we keep this idea that it is only that one Atma, or in this case, the one Brahman is everywhere, and it is that which is eternal, it is essentially immutable, we would say, and it is changeless, it is permanent, and that is the only thing which is there, in which all the things are rising and falling, they are giving birth, they're going back, just like the waves. So that is the comparison of the world with the waves. The other example we gave is this kind of a dream situation. In the dream, for example, if I dream that I'm going to be the Miss Universe, and I'm walking down the steps to receive, to meet the judges. And while I'm going through, I go through all these kind of emotions of having won the Miss Universe for the first time, which I never ever dreamt that I would ever do that. And I've become so identified it in my dream. But then when I wake up, I find that I have a sense of disappointment that, oh, where did all this dream disappear to, right? So that dream in which I was Miss Universe and everything, that was an unreal state. But the reality was this person who continued to be there in and through the deep, dream state, and even the waking state, and also the deep state. What is it that stays permanently through all the states? Is that Atma, or is that real? And that is the real thing, but the dream is not the unreal. Menaka, she asked a very good question in this regard, is how do I then translate this knowledge to my day-to-day stuff? And I think I have the question in the end, but since we are on this topic, we will talk about how can I take this knowledge in and through to all this. So to answer that question of the real and the unreal, and how do I translate that into my real life, it is not an easy thing. It is not easy to practice immediately if I have only a superficial knowledge. Now, when I say superficial knowledge, what I mean is we are listening to the pravachan, we have heard this right now. But in order to make this knowledge really sink in, I have to literally take some time out first and then reflect on what is exactly the one that is having, say, a longer period of existence. What do I mean by that is, it is hard for us to immediately conceive for something which is of temporary existence. So for example, if I get a certain joy by having a certain sweet or whatever, now I recognize that it is temporary, but while I'm having it, I'm just enjoying it so much, right? But if I can take a little bit of time to go through and reflect upon that experience and come to a firm conclusion that what I went through in that was very temporary happiness, and now using that as a kind of a fulcrum point and recognizing what are the other stuff that I gave a lot of reality to. And if I'm able to go through that process within my mind as a kind of a mananam and understand all the things that I was able to come to and or assign a temporariness to it, there will be a point where I'll come to where there is, beyond that, everything else seems like temporary. So with this kind of an analysis, then my next step of nididhyasanam, where I'm constantly looking at that, what is that changeless substratum? And when I'm able to recognize that that changeless substratum is me, myself, and I'm not this Sunitha, I'm not this ego, for example, to that extent, I have to keep firming up that nididhyasanam. When I can do that over a long period of time, and when when I come back, when I'm after doing the nididhyasanam, I can find that my mind gets into a state of an acceptance of the changes that goes around. Now, great jnanis, they are who have meditated on this for many years, and they have been able to establish that sense of oneness with everything going on. So coming back to this example of how do I practice the real versus unreal, I think we could also do another thing, which is another step is recognizing, even as I'm going through the world, the temporariness of everything, and to be able to accept it. So acceptance is the key, but the acceptance comes in when I recognize the temporariness or the impermanency of everything. As an example, we are going through a COVID situation right now. A year ago, if somebody had told us that, we will have a vaccine in March of this year, we would not have really thought too much about it, because at that moment we were going through it. But in and through the situation that we're going through, if I can have the reminder that this too shall pass, then to that extent, I'm coming with an acceptance of the situation that this for sure will pass, because it did not exist in the past. It will not exist in the future. So it has to pass. So that would be the first step towards the goal of trying to bring the sense of, or to understand the apparent reality or the illusory nature of the world in which we are in. So one other example is also in and through all these earrings, we find that they are all made of nothing but this gold material here. So if I'm able to recognize that as much as these are all names and forms, but the essential nature is nothing but gold. So that having said, now I can take that same kind of thinking to all the other stuff close to me. For example, the cup here is nothing but made of porcelain or something which is made of just plastic. And if I go through in and through what is plastic, they are nothing but the elements. So that also gives me an idea of the impermanency of this and what is the real nature of this. So all these examples, they allow us to give us an idea of the permanency versus impermanency, and also the temporariness of this. Along with this, we do recognize that even within ourselves, our body, for example, is constantly changing. We have our cells which are replaced over, I don't know what, how many, 8 years or whatever. These cells are continuously changing. We find that our intellect, our thought pattern changes, and everything about our aspect is constantly changing. So it is up to us to consciously recognize this aspect of changing. And when I do that, I can recognize the aspect of the changeless universe, that changes substratum that is there, on which this apparent universe of names and forms are placed. This other example we also talked about last time, that the in and through, as much as my body is changing as I go through the various stages of my life. What is permanent at the end of the day is this permanent I, which remains throughout the various vehicles of the change itself. And so the changes in my body, all the things that I go through, that is the unreal part, but the consciousness which is within the body itself is the real part of it. So all these examples gives us an idea of the changeless substratum and the changing aspect. So knowing this, we need to make a conscious attempt to hold on to that permanent and let go of the temporary things. So that having said, we also looked at Shloka number 17, which was Avinashi tu tad viddhi, yena sarvam idam tatam, vinashamavya yasyasya, na kaschit kartum arhati. So the characteristics of the self we saw is, one is, it is all pervading. It is sarvam idam tatam, all pervading, and it is avinashi. It is indestructible. And the destruction of this imperishable is not possible by anyone. Na kaschit kartum arhati. Vinasham avya yasyasya. Na kaschit na kaschit kartum arhati. So this is the aspect of the real that we talked about. And in the next shloka, of course, is coming the unreal. And here, to give you an idea of the sarvamidam tatam, just like how the clay is pervading literally all the pots. All these pots are nothing but clay, isn't it? We don't look at it like that. The minute we look at the world fascinates us. The world is so glittering. It is so shiny. All the names and forms, they just attract us so much. And we get so attracted by this through our sense organs. But in and through everything, just like here, for example, the different mud pots, they all have different names, they have different shapes, and they are functionally used for different purposes. Some may be used as garden pots, some may be used for collecting water. But in and through each one of them, what exists is only this mud or clay, what you might call it. And when we break it, it is also going to go back into that mud or clay. So if I can accept something like this, why can't I take this concept further on to things which matter to me most? Because the question that Menaka asked is very good, which is, how do I relate it to what I do? Now, looking at again the pots, it may seem, okay, they are pots, they are way out there, and that doesn't concern me. But the examples are there to show how I can take these examples and relate it to what my field of experience is. So even as I'm looking at these pots and objects, I could potentially look at it first as my house, for example, all the objects in my house, my phone, my, the pen that I write with, whatever. And from there on, taking it even closer and closer to me, then my relationships and, people I like, people I dislike. Can I take and see that same consciousness in all the people? So that's the kind of a sadhana or a mananam that we need to do to understand this. So this, again, now having mentioned about sarvam idam tatam, the all-pervading nature of Atma, we can see that in this world of finite beings now, finite in the sense we have all kinds of this world, this universe is made up of everything, whether it's the different types of plants, different type of animals, different type of beings, aquatic, terrestrial, everything. In all this, they also are constantly changing But in and through, if I can recognize that there is only that one pervading reality, consciousness, supreme being, whatever you might call it, all that is nothing but that substratum on which you have these names and forms. Another thing which the shloka also is trying to remind us is that avinashi tu tad viddhi yena sarvamidam tatam, is that all this changes that we see, instead of becoming with the change, if I can keep myself as an observer of the change. So I have this example of this boat in an ocean. So long as you are in the boat and there's nothing close to you, you don't see anything, you feel as if you're not moving. But in reality, you are moving because you are part of the change. When we are part of the change, we don't observe that change happening. But then, as an example of this boat, now when you see this boat, maybe now going closer, like imagine if we are on an Alaskan cruise or something, and you're right in the middle of the ocean, you don't see anything, but suddenly you come close to Seattle or near Seattle maybe, then you see that soon you see the changes, you see how the boat is moving fast and everything, right? So just like that, if there is a way for me to recognize, to change the position within myself of, instead of identifying myself with the change, but try to be an observer of the changes that is happening, then to that extent, I am identifying myself not with the body, and I'm recognizing that Atma that I am. So these are all, again, examples to show on how the aspect of Atma is shown in many of these shlokas. So with that, when we went to the next shloka of shloka number 18, we saw the unreal aspect. So far, we looked at the real aspect. Now, the unreal aspect, which is the asat aspect. Antavanta ime dehaha nityas yokta sharirinaha anashino aprameyasya tasmat yudhyasva bharata. So Sri Krishna is trying to remind Arjuna that antavanta ime dehaha, these bodies, they have an end, and in and through this, but the real stuff, or the eternal is this nityas yukta sharirinaha, the one which is there in the body, which is unaffected by the changes, the witness or the observer. That one is the one which is completely nitya, it is eternal, and it is anashi, which is indestructible, and it is also incomprehensible, aprameyasya, incomprehensible, aprameyasya. We'll come to that and we'll discuss that aspect as well. Therefore, yudhyasva bharata. Now, somebody might ask, what is Lord Krishna saying here? Is he trying to say that, anyway, the bodies don't have an end, therefore go ahead and you can kill? No. And this is the second question which actually was asked, which is there at the end also, which I'll bring it up now. The question that was asked was, nobody can kill anybody, correct? That is, none of us really have the license to kill, right? And yes, that is true. Nobody has a license to kill. But in this case, if Arjuna is fighting the war, that is his dharma. It is his dharma to to recognize, to bring in the goodness back into the world. And in order to bring the goodness, if it means that Duryodhana and others have to lose their lives, then that is the reason to bring the goodness. Now, does that mean that just because you kill Duryodhana, he's committing a sin? No. And this is what we discussed, I think, a few sessions back, about how that everyone is in their own journey. And we will be coming to discussion of that part of it later. But bringing this question back here, all I want to mention is that the point of this shloka is, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, is that now don't be afraid. So here the message is very clear. Shri Krishna is telling Arjuna is that you don't be afraid to do your dharma. So therefore, fight, O Bharata, is you don't be afraid. And indirectly, I think this is a message for all of us too, is to recognize, not to be limited, not to be afraid of what we need to do sometimes, is to really get over our own limitations, because our limitations, if you think about it, our limitations are those kind of bodies. They all have to sometimes disappear in order for the eternal in us to shine and for us to do our duty. So that, I think, is one of the powerful messages from this shloka, is Tasmat Yudhyasva Bharata, is take the bow and fight in order to achieve your goal, what needs to be done. So this word aprameya, we touched upon it last time a little bit, but aprameya, prameya means an object. In Vedantic language, where we talk about the whole subject of where you have, for any experience, for example, in any experience you have a knower is called as a pramata, and you have and then you have the object of the experience. The object of the experience, we call it as a prameya, and the knowledge that dawns by this is called as prama, and the means that is used to gain this knowledge is called as pramanam. So in that context, prameya, if it is an object of, so for example, if I'm looking at a flower, I say that I see a flower. The flower is the prameya. Here, Atma is a prameya. So the way to understand this is that Atma is not the object of our experience. Atma is the subject itself. So how do we understand the subject? So it is that because of which everything is happening, it is that consciousness which is enlivening everything. So in that sense, it is a prameya, so it is not an object. Prameya is an object, a prameya is not an object. So this is the idea of it being a prameya. So from here, now the next thing that Sri Krishna wants to address is this aspect of, again, going back to the subject of killing, and who is getting killed and who is not getting killed. So let's chant the shloka. Ya enam veti hantaram, ya enam veti hantaram, yaschainam manyate hatam, yaschainam manyate hatam, ubhau tau na vijanitaha, ubhau tau na vijanitaha, nayam hanti na hanyate, nayam hanti na hanyate. So here, if the question was, who is really getting killed? And if Arjuna was worried about whether he's killing the self. So Arjuna, Shri Krishna is telling here that ya enam hantaram veti, the one who thinks that the self is a killer, it is killing someone. Or ya enam hatam manyate, or the one who thinks that this self is being killed. So the one who thinks the self is a killer or the self is killed, ubhau tau na vijanitaha. Both of them, they don't know what is the truth. So if the one who thinks that the self is being killed or the self is being killed, then basically both of them are wrong conclusions. So what is the right conclusion here? The conclusion is Nayam hantina hanyate. The self never kills and the self is never killed. So ya enam veti hantaram, he who takes the self to be the slayer, or if we think that the self is being slain, yacha enam manyate hatam, ubhau tau na vijanitaha. Both of these are not the right conclusions, because na ayam hanti na hanyate. For this self does not slay, nor is it being slain also. So it is beyond the aspect of being killed or anything. So again, this is an extension, if you think of the word apramaya, where the self being apramaya, it is neither destructible or it cannot be destroyed. And in that sense, so the self is not a doer, because if you remember, at one time Arjuna was very concerned that he was the one who was going to be killing people, right? So in that sense, here Lord Krishna is reminding Arjuna that the self is a non-doer. It is an akarta. It doesn't do anything. And also, it is also an abhokta. It is also a non-enjoyer. That is, in the presence of consciousness, the physical body, everything functions, and it lends sentiency to the whole mind, body, intellect complex. But it does only that. It just adds a sentiency. It doesn't have the capacity to do an action. It does, and it's only the aspect of sentiency that is being given by this consciousness. So as an example, we find that the fire, it gives heat, but giving heat is not an action. It's just the nature of the fire itself. And the sun, in the presence of the sun, everything grows, but the sun is not making things grow. So in all this, we find that the self just gives a sentiency for anything to do its action, but by itself, it is not a doer and it is not an enjoyer. So this brings the, having said that, the next aspect of, as an extension to this shloka is, Na jayate mriyate va kadachit, Na jayate mriyate va kadachit, Nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyah, Nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyah, Ajo nitya shashvatoyam puranah, Ajo nitya shashvatoyam puranah, Na hanyate hanyamane sharire, Na hanyate hanyamane sharire. So Now, another aspect of the Atma being discussed, which is na jayate. The self is not born. The self is neither born, nor does it ever die. Na jayate mriyate va. At any time, mriyate va, it does not die. Nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyaha. So after having been, it ceases also not to be. And it is also, it is ajaha, which is, it is unborn. It is nityaha, eternal, changeless, shashvato ayam puranaha. It is changeless and it is ancient, puranaha. And in all this, na hanyate hanyamane shariri. The self is not killed when the body is killed. So again, this is another shloka for as an argument for Arjuna when he raised the question about the aspect of killing. So na jayate, the self is not born. Na mriyate, it doesn't die. Nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyaha. So it is also not after coming into existence, does it become non-existence. It is always existent. It never becomes non-existence. And then it is ajaha, nityaha, and shashvataha. Shashvataha meaning it is kshayarahitaha, that is free from any decay. And then it is puranaha. Here in this context, it actually means that it is vritti rahitaha, which means it is free from any growth also, meaning that there is no modification in it. There is no need for it to grow. There is no need for it to die. It is modification less Atma. So therefore, it doesn't have to die. So na hanyate hanyamane shri. So even when the body is killed, the self is not killed because it just cannot get killed. It just does not get modified. So Shri Krishna is reminding Arjuna that this Atma is nirvikaraha. Nirvikaraha indicating it's free from modifications. So sometimes some things may be nitya or permanent, but it can still be filled with modifications. For example, when this body is about 60 years old, within the span, it may seem that it is eternal. But then there are so many modifications that this body is going through, even though it is living for that long, right? It goes through many modifications, which I'll show you in the next stage here. So whoever knows that, whoever understands him to be the slayer or the doer, or he says, I'm being killed not at this level, both of them, they do not understand this aspect, like how we said, you can never, you're only killing the body, but the Atma itself doesn't get slayed itself. So what are the modifications that the body goes through? Let us see all of them. So within our body, when the body is born, even before the body is born, there is the aspect of asti. So the modification, it goes through asti. Then it undergoes jayate. Jayate is birth. Then it goes through the modification of growth or vardate. Then viparinamate, where it undergoes changes. And then finally it undergoes apakshiyate or decay. And finally vinashyati. So these are all the modifications of any physical body. But what Sri Krishna is trying to say in the shloka is that the self in us, the consciousness, is actually free from all these modifications. So now there is also this aspect of time that is brought in, because it's only with time that you go through all these modifications. So this consciousness, since it is not conditioned by time, now we see that because time is actually, if you look at it, is also the it is part of the modifications. So time is, Atma is even beyond time. Atma is even beyond space for that reason. So time is, and really, it's again the object of consciousness, you can say it. It is, and it is also part, everything in this world is basically conditioned by this time. And because of that, you see that beings are constantly in the state of change. And this change itself, can be the death of one previous aspect of the body or one aspect of the condition leading to another condition. So, but then Atma is way beyond all these changes. So with this, we have now seen about 7 of the characteristics of the Atma, which is Nityaha. And in Shloka 16, we saw Sat, Satsvarupaha. It is all-pervading, Sarvagata. It is Pramaya, which is, it is not an object of consciousness. It is the subject itself. It is the enlivening principle, or it is the illuminator of all experiences. It is Akarta, which is, it's a non-doer. And it is Abhokta, which is a non-enjoyer. And then it is Nirvikaraha, which is, there is no modifications at all. So we see there are 7 modifications, 7 aspects of Atma we have seen so far. Now, another aspect, which is, some of them are already mentioned before, but we will go through this one here. Veda vinashinam nityam. Veda vinashinam nityam. Ya enamajam avyayam. Ya enamajam avyayam. Katham sapurusha partha. Katham sapurusha partha. Kam ghatayati hantikam. Kam ghatayati hantikam. So Veda avinashinam nityam. Veda, the word Veda comes from the dhatu with. With means to know. So Veda avinashinam nityam. Nityam, we have seen that word already. Nityam means indestructible. So Veda avinashinam nityam. One who knows that he is indestructible. Ya enam ajam avyayam. One who knows that he is indestructible and eternal, that his self is unborn and deathless. So it is birthless and it is deathless. So ajam and avyayam, avyayam, which is partless also, you can say. Katham sapurusha partha. So how can that man, O Partha, be a cause to slay him or be slain by him? So again, a nice question, which Sri Krishna is saying about, how the self is ajam, it is imperishable. And so how can this person really kill someone or instigate another person to kill? So, so having said this, let's look at the next shloka. This is a very famous shloka, and I think some of you might be able to relate this to the rebirth concept. This is a shloka which is always talked about in terms of the rebirth. Very nice shloka, very powerful. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya. Navani ghrannati naroparani. Navani ghrannati naroparani. Tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani. Tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani. Anyani sanyati navani dehi. Anyani sanyati navani dehi. So, vasamsi vihaya, vasamsi indicating old worn out clothes. Okay, vihaya having given up, and these clothes that he has given up, and navani, new clothes, grinnati, which is taken up, naroparani, which he takes up in the same way, tatha sharirani, so too in the same way, it is with all these human bodies, sharirani, vihaya jirnani, the worn out bodies are cast away. Vihaya jirnani, anyani sanyati navani dehi, and other bodies are entered, and other new bodies are entered, or are basically the soul enters into the new bodies. So again, a nice shloka here, which needs to be gone into a little more detail, and I want to make sure we have the time to go through it. So I will stop here. It's 9:26. And we'll go through the questions which was asked. So these were the two questions that was asked. And I think it is, I answered this in the context of the shloka itself. So we will stop here, and we will take those two shlokas a little more in depth, because the rebirth shloka has to be understood in its proper contextual elements there. So I want to bring in a couple of doshas, which I want to look at the shloka from three different aspects. One is the Shruti. What does the Upanishads say on this one? The second is the logic. I know you'd be happy to hear that there is a logic to this aspect of rebirth. And the third thing is from the Anubhuti or experience. So in order to keep to the flow of that shloka, we will stop at this point. And as always, if there's any clarifications needed for the shlokas that we covered today, please do send me an email or a WhatsApp. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kasyat dukkha bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shantihi. Om purnamada purnamidam purnat purnamudachyate purnasya purnamadaya purnameva vashishyate. Om shanti shanti shantihi. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you. Hari Om.
Hari Om.